Good morning, church. It's a brand new morning. It's a brand new week, but it's also a brand new month. And so with that, I want to challenge you to reflect and evaluate your walk with Christ. Since the beginning of this year, do you feel like your relationship with Jesus is growing? Do you feel like your relationship is kind of the same? Or do you feel like your relationship is kind of getting worse? Or maybe you're wrestling and struggling and maybe there's a lot of confusion for you. Regardless of where you may stand or where you feel like your relationship is with Jesus, I want you to become more intentional about how you can continuously grow closer to Him. And like I said, regardless of where you are, whether you're struggling, whether you feel the same, or whether you feel like you're growing, to be very intentional about your walk with Jesus. So with that, let's begin. How many of you guys like photography? For me, even though I didn't have the best experience with photography at the start, I really do enjoy taking pictures. I love pictures. I have a few cameras myself, and I have a phone, which most of you guys have nice phones that have really good camera quality. And so if you look through my phone, you'll see tons and tons of pictures, right? You'll see pictures of people that are really special to me. You'll see pictures of the church and church people. You'll see pictures of my cat Mango, and you'll see a lot of pictures of nature and clouds because I really enjoy nature. Now, let's talk a little bit about photography. Now, when you look at a picture that either you took or maybe somebody else took, it brings back memories, right? In one picture, you can bring back so many different emotions, so many different thoughts, different memories, right? Just from one picture. Now, one of the things that I really like doing is looking at old pictures. It always is such a throwback, right? You look at a picture when you were a baby, or when you were in high school, or maybe when you're in college. Now, depending on what kind of picture you have or what kind of picture you like to look at, some of these pictures not only contain memories and emotions and all the whole nine yards and all of that, but sometimes the pictures that we have on our phones can become reminders of who we used to be. Now, for example, what I mean by that is maybe you struggled with weight in the past, and you have pictures of a time when you clearly struggled with weight, and you have a whole plethora of pictures of your old self. And when you look back at those pictures, it's a reminder of who you used to be. And maybe now you've lost a lot of weight and you look at yourself and you're reminded, I used to be like that, but now I'm like this. Okay? Or maybe you had a picture of a time when you suffered an injury for whatever reason it may be. Maybe a car accident, or maybe, a sports accident, or, you were just being clumsy and you stubbed your toe really hard on the corner of the bed and you had to get a cast, or whatever it may be. You look at the picture and it reminds you of what had happened and who you were when that happened. Now, I could go on and on with the examples of what pictures can do for us and what pictures can remind us of, but remembering who you were becomes an important part of understanding who you are now. Now, today we dive into the next book after the book of Philippians, and that's the book of Colossians. Now, just like the book of Philippians, the book of Colossians was written by Paul, and it's only 4-chapter book, so we'll be finished by the end of this week. Now, Paul was writing this letter to the church in Colossae, which is now what we know now as modern day Turkey. Now, what's really interesting about this letter is that he's writing to a group of believers that he's actually never met. And he didn't even start this church like some of the other churches that he writes to, but it was actually a co-worker of Paul that was from this city that started and cared for this group of believers. So in this letter is an address to a group of believers that he has never met, but it's very clear that he's aware of all the issues that the church was going through. Now, because these issues were issues that other churches that had also faced, you see Paul repeating a lot of themes in maybe the other letters. And so you might notice some overlap, but that's really okay. And there's a really important lesson that we can take. And it's a good reminder, honestly, for us in our spiritual walk. Now, for the church in Colossae, the issue was that there was pressure that was tempting these people to turn away from Jesus and to focus on other things other than Him. So ultimately what you'll see is that Paul's letter gives encouragement to the churches and guides them into how to have a stronger and deeper relationship with Jesus, and he leaves that as the solution. Now let's turn your Bibles to Colossians 1:21-22. It says, once you were alienated from God and were enemies in the mind because of your evil behavior. But now he has reconciled you by Christ's physical body through death to present you holy in his sight, without blemish and free from accusation. I really love the way that Paul puts this together, because he tells the church that you were once alienated from God, or in other words, you were a stranger to God. You were once people who had no connection with him. In fact, you were enemies because of your evil ways. Now, if we were to stop here, this would be terrible. But of course, Paul doesn't leave us on this note. Paul reminds them, but he says, now you are reconciled. You are no longer a stranger. You have been restored. And it's because it's none other than the death and resurrection of Jesus Christ for you that you have been restored. It's through his perfect life and his sacrifice for you that you can be restored without blemish and be free of all accusations. Now that's beautiful. But some of you might think, Pastor, we hear this message all the time. It's not new. It's not special. We know it's amazing and we know Jesus' sacrifice for us, but now what? Now, this is why I think Paul sets up his point this way. You see, church, one way we can learn to appreciate what God has done for us is to remember what we were like before we experienced God's grace. In other words, for us to truly appreciate the sacrifice Jesus made for you and I, we have to remember how we used to be alienated. We were separated from God, and we were enemies because of our evil ways. It's in this perspective that we can come to a better understanding of Jesus' tremendous sacrifice for you and I. You see, if we forget who we are, it can lead to spiritual pride, ignorance, and arrogance, and that can ultimately become the roadblock to our spiritual growth. But remember, Paul doesn't say the focus is just on who we used to be. Paul's focus is pointing ultimately to Jesus Christ and the sacrifice that he made. So church, I leave you with this. Remember who you were and who you used to be, so that we can better understand who Jesus Christ is and what he's done for you.